game centered around combat. It is themed around my favorite element, water. And you are engaging in naval warfare. So you combine those two together, water and combat. You have me very, very interested for this combat-oriented game. Now, today we are talking about Articles of War Privateer, which is designed by Tyler Christofferson, David Carey, and art by Kelton Vincent. This game is also published by Sewage Treatment Games, which sponsored today's video, so take what you will. Now, Wolfpack, let us begin talking about this combat game. So this game is for 2 to 6 players. It plays in about 20 to 30 minutes, which seems to be pretty spot on from my play so far. And also note that this is a prototype version of the game. When the Kickstarter goes live, it will be linked down below in the description box. Now here's what the game's about. You're playing as a young Commodore who has one goal: take the seas back for your home nation. Now to do so, you're going to be engaging in battles across the seas, fighting for a merchant ship, maneuvering around various islands, and firing cannons to hit your target. Now here's how the game works. You start off as one out of 6 Commodores, and the number in the top right corner is going to give you your player initiation order, which pretty much tells you where you're going to start off first in the map. So if I drew number 1, then I would get first placement, and you get to place your ship on one of these hexes with a circle. There are 6 of them on the map, since of course this plays up to 6 players. And then once everyone goes around placing the first ship, you're gonna go around one more time and place your second ship adjacent to that starting hex. From there, you have a choice because you can spend 2 doubloons, because everyone starts off with 2 doubloons. This is going to be your end game victory condition. The most doubloons by the end is going to be the winner. Now with those 2 doubloons that you start out with, you have a choice because you can spend them in order to gain another ship. So if I were playing as red and I were to spend those doubloons, I can grab another ship and place it adjacent to my starting hex. Reason why this is important is because now you have more firepower, you have more maneuverability, you pretty much have a bigger team when you're starting on the board if you spend those doubloons. But there is a trade-off because, like I said, end of the game, whoever has the most doubloons wins. So if you want to play hyper-aggressive, like I always do for every single game, then you will always spend those doubloons. Now from there is going to be a quick reverse because then whoever chose last for their ships is then going to choose the amount of terrain tiles that they get to use for this game. The more terrain tiles used, and the more complicated and the more difficult the game will be. Players are going to randomize these into these barrels, and then you get to pick from these and then place them onto the map. Now from there, here's how you play the game. You are going to choose 2 dice on your turn to roll per ship that you have on your map. So if I was playing as black, I would choose between 2 of the sail dice or 2 of the cannonball dice. Here's how both dice works. So first, let's talk about the sail dice. So with these D4s, I'm gonna put them in the barrel, shake them, and when I roll them, I get a movement of 2 to use, and I can allocate them to one single ship or another ship, but you have to always use 1 sail die per ship. So from here, let's say I want to move this one closer to yellow. I always have to move in a straight line. So I can go 2 steps this way, 2 this way. I can't go here because there's an island blocking that. You can't sail through a volcano, but more about that later. And I can also go this way or this way. So I'm gonna go closer towards the yellow ship and move my ship 2 spaces. There's 1 allocation. And then I have 1 more movement point to use with this sail die. So I have 2 more, and I'll send another one towards green and we'll angle it this way. That's it for movement points. Those are the sailing dice. It lets you move around the map, and you also have to spend the entire amount. So even if I get like 4, I have to spend all 4 movement points and make it to a viable location. Now from there, you also have the more fun dice, in my opinion. These are the cannonball dice. Now these are going to strike your opponents depending on what you roll, and these are D20s. Now technically, since I have 3 ships, I can still roll 4 more dice. So I'm gonna roll 4 cannonball dice and see where this takes me. So I'm gonna roll these from the barrel, and I got a 2, 2, 2, and a 5. Now 2 is spot on perfect because now my target has been acquired. I only need a 2 in order to sink this ship. So with this 2 cannonball, I'll spend that, and the green ship goes down just like that. And in turn, I also get a doubloon for sinking that ship. Now, quick side note, I know I showed you the sail dice and the cannonball dice being rolled separately, but in game, you'll actually roll 2 dice per ship all at the same time. So if I have 2 ships on the board, I can actually roll 2 sail dice and 2 cannonball dice all at once. And you just have to make sure that 1 sail die at the minimum is used for each ship, but then you can allocate them in any order you want. Now that's the gist of how the game works. There are a couple of other little nuances, like for instance, when you sail, you can't sail past the map or else your ship has been considered to flee, and then you would lose that ship permanently until you regain it back. One way you can regain it back is actually by going to the merchant ship. So if you go to merchant ship, this is pretty much like your initial race. When you go to the merchant ship, you can board that ship and either you take it over or you can also sink it. That way no one else can use it as well. You can also take over other people's ships and board them. So if you use a movement point to exactly either you run through them or you land on their space, if you do that properly, then you can board their ship and again, just like the merchant ship, you can either take it over or sink it. Now also the terrain, last thing I want to mention, is that they do different things depending on which ones you're interacting with. So if you are, for instance, trying to go through the reef, if my black ship was here and I'm trying to go through the reef, I actually have to roll one of the cannonball die. And if I roll a 1, I'm gonna lose that ship. But if I roll anything else, then it'll be safe for me to move through the reef. I can also fire cannons over the reef in case there was a ship on the other side of the reef as well. So that's the reef. And then the other 2 terrain locations kind of subtract away from those conditions. So for a desert island, for instance, I can fire over it, but I can't move through it. And then for the volcano island, you cannot fire over it and you also cannot move through it at all. That is how the terrain works. Game's over when you are the last player remaining with ships on the board, and whoever has the most doubloons by the end will be the winner. Now, let me tell you what I don't like and what I like about this game. Okay, so I played this game 3 times at the 2-player count and twice at the 3-player count, so 5 games total of this game. It's very, very quick, usually 15 to 20 minutes. Of course, you can add on more time with the more amount of players that you have. But there are a couple of issues that I want to mention with the game. So the first one is it kind of gets you into this stalemate when you only have 1 ship remaining. Now, there is a rule set in the game manual called Desperation Dice, which means you actually get 1 more cannonball die when you have 1 ship remaining. That hasn't helped me too much from our plays so far, and how I think that the game can mitigate that condition, because when you get to like this stalemate version, when you have 1 ship remaining, the same thing happens where either you're running away from everybody else and it becomes like this kind of race where you're kind of dragging on the game, or when you're fighting, you just don't get what you need, and the dice, of course, are so random, so you don't always hit what you need to hit, and it happens so often that it feels more repetitive than fun. So with that said, how I think the game can mitigate that and improve on that is actually, like if you ever played Call of Duty, you know at the very end of the game, you have this, like in Warzone, you have like this closure of like the gas cloud, so like the map shrinks. That mechanic in the video game would fit perfectly for the board game, for this board game. Because imagine if you had like, thematically of course, imagine if you had like a storm or hurricane that just like comes in and just cuts off a line of the map like with every single turn. And I feel like that would exponentially increase the amount of tension, and it would just keep the overall gameplay elevated the entire time instead of it going up, 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 and then you get to like last ship and it kind of just slowly goes down because now you're just rolling dice back and forth, trying to hit somebody, and you're not getting what you need, and it kind of just drags on. So with a storm or hurricane mechanic that kind of just swipes through the map, either in a line, or it would even be cooler if it was like a circle too. If it kind of just shrinks the map like this, I think it would help with the stalemate play a lot. Imagine too if you only had 1 ship remaining and another player that you're playing against has 3 ships remaining, and then they have to maneuver all their ships away from the hurricane. Like I feel like that hurricane mechanic would swipe away the other ships, and then that tension would still build up, right? Because what if you have 1 ship and then 3 ships, and it's too hard to maneuver 3 ships with the storm coming in, and then that one decreases to 1 ship. Long story short, I feel like it would introduce a really interesting catch-up mechanic and also mitigate that stalemate play, which is the first issue that I found about this game. Now, the second thing I found kind of iffy about Articles of War is with the merchant ship, that initial race in the beginning. So in that first race to the merchant ship, everyone's trying to get an extra ship or just sink it, try to get away from everybody else, right? That one is a little strange because initially in like the core rules, you don't get anything from sinking the ship, and you can board it in order to increase the amount of ships that you have. But in the advanced rule set, you can gain a doubloon for it if you want to. And I feel like that's a miss for me, because if the game kind of just committed more and just said like, hey, like when you sink this ship, you gain gold for it. If you get rewarded for managing that feat before everybody else, I feel like it would be a lot better. And it also would ramp up the gameplay, especially in the beginning too. It would just keep it up instead of like, oh, I get there, I sunk the ship before everybody else got there, and I get nothing. It's kind of weird, right? Especially if you have 3 ships already, like you're not going to get a 4th ship, or maybe you do, in the later rule set, but either way, that race towards the first merchant ship was a little bit lackluster, and I feel like the game could commit to it and just said, hey, like, there's no player flexibility here. If you sink that ship, you get a gold doubloon, and you get rewarded for your efforts for getting there first. So overall, to summarize issue number 2, I feel like if the game committed more and gave players a little bit less flexibility where it didn't need to, I think it would improve a lot on the gameplay. Now, I'll be honest, after my first playthrough of this game, I was a little bit skeptic because I felt like the rolling mechanisms got a little bit repetitive because ultimately it's like a transparent battlefield, right? You're trying to get one specific number, one specific movement point in order to sink a ship, and then once you do, whoever gains the most doubloons by the end wins. So I felt like it was lacking in strategy, but at the same time, I feel like it also depends on where this target, where the game is targeting, right? Because if you're trying to find a 15 to 30 minute super lightweight game, a game that you can play with up to 6 players that fills in that combat mechanic, you're gonna find it here. But if you want more depth and strategy, you're not gonna get that here. And I feel like the foundation, at least for Articles of War, is set. Now for me, I definitely crave a lot more complexity in games like this. I think, hear me out here on this idea, but for like the Commodores, for instance, they can be given asymmetric powers. Like even if the game wanted to, like here's a way the game can be flexible, right? Because if you start out with this one Commodore card, one side is gonna give you just player initiation number. But if you wanna increase it and grab a bigger audience and have more engaging players, how about on this side, instead of being random, it could be the same thing, but with asymmetric player powers. So then one Commodore can have, you know, an extra cannonball die. They'll be hyper aggressive, my type of style for a Commodore. Another Commodore can be super fast for movement and they can get another sailing dice to start with. So they can get 3 sailing dice per ship versus 2. Might be a little bit overpowered, but you see where I'm going here, right? They can just like plow through islands and maybe get points or get doubloons for crashing through islands, something like that, right? So I feel like the asymmetry with Commodores would definitely add to the gameplay. And the last one that I think would definitely appeal to a lot more players is if there was a way to mitigate the dice. If there were like cards that you can draw every round and they give you a specific ability, like you can add +1, -1 to your dice, or maybe you can re-roll some dice. Cards like that, like a simple cards like that, would definitely elevate the gameplay a ton and make it way more replayable for sure. So overall, I had fun playing it. It definitely fills in a very specific niche where you're trying to find a combat game that's super quick, super light, and one that you can grab a bunch of people to play with. Everyone's gonna love rolling dice, especially in these really cool barrels, of course. So the table presence and the overall quality of the components is here, the foundation's here. But again, for me, I definitely crave a lot more complexity to it. You can add some asymmetric cards, you can add ways to mitigate the dice over here. I definitely enjoy a lot more, and we had way more fun screaming at each other at a higher player count, even at 3, but I can't imagine playing this at 6. I'm sure it would be a wild, wild game. But even with that, if you're playing at 2, there's also in the advanced mode, you can control 2 fleets at once, and that makes for way more interesting gameplay than just controlling 1. But if you're looking for like a gateway game, you're looking for a lighter weight game, one that can be played very, very fast, one that is super easy to teach. I taught this to my niece who's 6 years old. She loved it because she just loved rolling the dice in the barrels. If you're looking for games like that, I think it's going to be very family friendly. If you're looking for a quick roll and fight, is that a board game theme topic? I feel like it should be. If you're looking for a quick roll and fight game, then you're gonna find that here, especially if you're looking for one right before a holiday dinner. Lastly, also wanted to mention that Sewage Treatment Games is taking submissions for any rule suggestions. You can check that out at their website linked below. Once again, thank you to Sewage Treatment Games for sponsoring today's video. I hope you all enjoyed the review. Let me know down in the comments below if you're looking to back it, if you're not gonna back it, what you think about it. I wanna know everything you're thinking about, and I will see you all in the next one.